Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking your time out and, joining us for this webinar. My name is Tina, and I am your main contact here at Learning Services. Before we get started, just just one moment, please, while I get something sorted out. Sorry about that, guys. Just had a little bit of a technical issue there. So, welcome again. I see that Barb, you've already introduced yourself. Thank you for joining us. If you're on the desktop, to the right of the video, there's a chat function that you can use to introduce yourself to everyone. If you're on the mobile, you can swipe up below the video to be able to have access to that chat function as well. So again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Tina, and I'm your main contact here at Learning Services. If you experience any buffering issues as the webinar moves on, please note that you can refresh your page by pressing on Control and R or FR if you're on a Google Chrome computer. Otherwise, on any Windows computer, you can press FN and F5. That should do the trick for you. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's get started on the webinar, making Gmail work for your Mac and iOS devices. Hopefully by the end of the webinar, you will have, you will leave feeling very relaxed and very less apprehensive about, staying on top of your communication as a whole. As we know, this can be very challenging. The reason I wanted to do this webinar is because for brokers and agents using iOS and or iPhones, it can be very challenging managing an additional product on your device. For example, managing your Gmail on your device. I wanted to show you essentially how you can integrate your Gmail account with your Mac, Mail, or your iOS device so that your communication process is a whole lot easier. And for the purpose of this webinar, we'll focus primarily just on Gmail, as this is a very, very important component of the G Suite that we use and a key aspect to successfully running your business. So on the agenda for today, we'll be looking at some key functionalities in your Gmail and Mail. We will be looking at how to set up your @realapage.ca account on your Mac, Mail, and iPhone. So that's a very practical component of the webinar today. And we'll also just look at, just how to save your events appointments directly from your email into your calendar. And that's very simple, very easy, but it's a trick that we sometimes miss. Please note that this webinar is recorded live. So you can pause it anytime, you can come back to it. You can even go back and watch for a review after the webinar itself has ended. Going throughout this webinar, I do have some assumptions that I'm carrying forward. So, I'm having the assumption that we all have some prior knowledge of Gmail, how to access our Gmail, how to use Calendar on Gmail, that everyone attending this webinar has some knowledge or experience using Mac Mail, iOS Mail as well, because this is the main tool, the main purpose of the webinar. And also that we have some very limited knowledge on using non-related Mac products on your Mac and iOS devices. But in the case that my assumptions are not correct, we do have additional resources that are at your disposal, and you can have access to those by visiting, our RLP network. And on RLP network, you can get onto the training site, then select webinar training, and you can have access to our Building Your Tech Toolkit series of webinars where you'd be able to see session on, setting up your Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Photos, and other components of the G Suite, such as Google Drive. So if you visit the RLP network and on the webinar training link, for sure, you definitely have a whole variety of those webinars that you can make use of in terms of just better equipping yourself for Gmail, but also, using Gmail for your business. Just a little warning before moving forward with the webinar. Our customer care team is always here to support, but I do have to point out that our support for iOS devices, that we do provide support for iOS devices, but not on MacMail. And this is primarily because MacMail has many different system setups. Well, Mac computer in general, we don't provide support for Mac computers, but we do provide the support for iOS devices. So Mac has too many different system setups, so that it makes it very difficult for us to be able to provide comprehensive support because there are just too many systems to deal with. But in general, we do have our bilingual customer care team that's available here for you Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And you can always reach out to them for any other issues that you have. Regarding maybe your iOS device and setting up Gmail for your iOS device. So now what is webmail, right? What is a webmail? Webmail basically is, our email, and it's all stored on an email server. So for example, our Gmail accounts, those are webmails. So to be able to have access to our emails, we have to log on to gmail.com to be able to retrieve our emails, to be able to compose an email, and just to stay in contact with our customers, with our agents. So to be able to always have access to your mail, if you're using a webmail, that means you have to always have access to an internet connection, because all of the emails that you receive or send are backed up on the email server, so you don't actually have access to them offline. And the other important thing of with webmail is that all of it automatically scans for viruses. Well, the server automatically scans for viruses, so that's a good thing. You don't have to buy additional antivirus software for the webmail. Now, let's compare the webmail versus the mail client. What is a mail client? Right? So a mail client, very opposite to what, not very opposite, but still very different to what a webmail is. The mail client essentially is a computer program that allows users to, have access to your email. So you can have access to your email on your computer or on your phone offline. So for example, the Mac mail that we have on our Mac computer, or the Mac mail that we have, the iOS mail that we have on our iOS phone, that's a mail client. Because instead of being hosted by a server, instead of being hosted, say, by a Gmail server or by a Hotmail server or by a Yahoo server, it's hosted on your computer. So it receives emails from the server, stores those emails on your computer or on your phone, allowing you access to those emails at all times. So whether you're connected to Wi-Fi or not, whether you're connected to internet at home, you can have access to your emails via mail client because they're stored on your computer. Again, as I'm going through this webinar, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out via the live chat and just ask your questions. If you need me to slow down or repeat something or clarify something that I've mentioned, don't hesitate to comment on the chat function of the webinar. So moving on with what a mail client is, there are some really key components to mail client that makes it really useful for business purposes. So for example, in terms of staying on top of your communication, having to communicate with potential buyers, potential sellers, just being able to have access to your email at all times. Some of the key features of the mail client that we see very often, and this transfers over to whether you're using your mobile device or whether you're using your Mac computer, these various features are they carry over, so they're very consistent across those two devices. So one of the main key feature of the mail client is the centralized emails. So the centralized email essentially means that you have access, or in your inbox, you have access to all of the different email accounts that you're added to that mail client. So whether it's your Yahoo email, whether it's your at royallepage.ca email, whether it's your Hotmail email, you can have access to all of those different emails in that centralized email. And even within that, you still have access to those individualized inbox. So if you wanted to just go directly to your at royallepage.ca inbox, there's a separate inbox for that, just because the different accounts are separated, but still together within that centralized email. Some of the other key features of the mail client, we have the 2-day filter. And essentially what that does is you're able to filter your email to just give you incoming emails for the day. So for example, if an email is coming in today, you're very active, you can actively receive that email. Sorry about that. You can very actively receive that email, respond to it, right? So you're being very productive, you're being on top of your email on a day-to-day basis. So you're responding to the emails as they come in rather than accumulating the emails and say you can respond to them on another day. So that's a very important feature that's part of the mail client, and it's also part of Gmail within Gmail. But one thing again that I would like to mention with using mail client is just that, especially on your iOS device and on your Mac computer, is the fact that it carries over across both devices. So it's very simplified. It's very consistent across both. If you know how to use your iOS device, you can very much easily use your Mac computer in terms of these features. One of the other key features, I'm not going to go through all of these features for the moment because we can pretty much tell what they are. But one of the other key features that I really want to highlight to you is the mark read emails as unread. I really like this feature just because, for example, say you're out during an open house and, you receive an email and it's very important, it's an inquiry about a potential listing, but you don't have the time to respond to that email at that specific moment, right? So you can just click to unread that email, to mark that email as unread. When you get back to the office, when you get back home, you open your computer, that email is marked as unread as well on your computer because, again, it carries over across your iOS device and your Mac computer. So then you can respond to that email. So that's a very important an important feature that I personally use quite often, and I find it's really, really useful in terms of staying on top of our communication and making sure that we don't miss anything. Again, I mentioned centralized email. This is just an overview of how the centralized email looks like, right? So these are all the individualized inboxes. And then, so you see like the different filters that you have carries over as well. And then say, for example, here, these are all of your inboxes, individualized inbox, so your iCloud, your Gmail, and if you add like your at Royal LePage email, that's going to come there as well. So now, sorry about that, I was just having a look at something here. I would like to show you one of the key features also that I just mentioned. That's the mark unread feature. I wanted to show you just what it looks like within an email. Just because me mentioning that might not necessarily, clarify things for you. So for example, this is an email that I've opened up. And let me just go back here. So start from the beginning. I'm going a little bit too fast here. So that's an email, my inbox that I just opened. And again, this is all inboxes. I just select one random email. Here it's a junk email about Canadian fashion. And then this is an email that's already read, right? It's an email that I've already opened previously. Now, to what I just did here, see there is this little blue button that just came up. This button wasn't there initially, because if you remember, I opened that inbox, it was all just a blank inbox with a message. This initial blue button wasn't there. So what did I do for that button to appear? Essentially, you see this little flag. This little flag here at the very bottom of the screen. Click on that. Once you click on that flag, it's going to ask you if you wanted to essentially mark that specific email as read or unread. So then that email then goes back into your unread folder. So when you find the time to go back home or you find the time to go back to the office, that email will be marked as unread on both your iOS device and on your Mac mail. So then you can actually receive that as an unread email and then respond to that email. So that's a really key feature that, I figured rather than just mentioning it, it would be really important for me to show it to you so you can actually see what it looks like as well. And as you can see here from this little, that little flag there as well, when you're marking your email as read or unread, there are other things here that you can do, right? So for example, the notify me function. The notify me function essentially means that you get a notification. Say if it's a thread, you get a notification when there's a response to that thread email, or you get even if it's not a thread email, you get a notification that there's been an action taken on that email. So that's a really key one as well, especially if it's an important email that I'm really actively waiting for a response. Say I'm waiting to hear final response on something on a cell. I would definitely click on the notify me function for that email when when a response comes in, right? So if a response comes in, I get that notification that there's an email that just came in and I can go verify my email. So again, those are just some key functions that I wanted to highlight. If you go around, you play with your iOS device, you play with the mail function in the mail app in your iOS device and the mail app on your Mac iOS, you can figure out how simple all of these different functions are and how practical they are on a day-to-day basis. Now that I just gave you that really, really quick overview, I would like to really now guide you because I feel this is the main part of the webinar. It's more of the practical part of it. I'd like to guide you to, in terms of adding your adroyallepage.ca email to your iOS mail and, looking at adding your signature to both mail on iOS device and again, transferring events, so appointments, bookings from your Mac Mail and iOS device directly to your calendar. The first thing that I would ask, if you have your iOS, let's just pause here. So if you have your phone with you, just take it out. So just take out your phone, make sure you're connected to Wi-Fi, connected to internet. And the very first thing that I want us to do is to make sure that we have our iCloud set up. This is really important because as I mentioned already, our iOS device and Mac computers really carry over. So everything that, our information that we have stored into our Mac computers can very easily be transferred into our iOS devices. But to be able to do that, it means that this iCloud function needs to be activated, right? So how do we do that? To be able to activate that, go on your settings. So our settings should be this little tool thing. I don't really know how to call that. It's like a wheel, I guess, or like a gear, yeah. So if you click on that, it's going to take you into your general settings. Click on where you have your name. So your account, essentially, your Apple ID account. And then you're going to see the iCloud settings. Click on that. You want to make sure that you have all of your devices turned on for iCloud. I personally prefer it that way just so that all of my information can carry over. So if I'm using, maybe my iTunes, I have iTunes, my music can carry over from my iPhone to my computer. If I'm using my mail, I make sure that my iCloud is turned on so that my incoming mail carries over to my Mac computer as well. So as you can see on my screen, basically all of my devices are turned on. So essentially what you want to do is like this little button here. If you see that it's gray, just turn it on or swipe on it and it will be activated and you'd have that green here notifying you that it's turned on. Again, this is going to help us moving forward with the practical side of the webinar in terms of, say, adding your @royallepage.ca email into your iOS device, because then that's going to sync into your computer to make sure that you're activated as well on your computer. Another point that I would like to mention is essentially a huge part of our communication is having signatures. If we're sending emails from our phone, we need to make sure that our signature from our @royallepage.ca email carries over into our phone, right? So we need to make sure that we're set up across all of our devices, that we're set up to be consistent, to be professional, and to make sure that we have all of our information. They're communicating who we are, what we do, and how we can be contacted. So this image on the screen here, as you can see, is what your signature currently looks like if you're not set up. So it says sent from my iPhone. That's what, a potential buyer is going to get if you're communicating with them, right? So if you haven't set up your email, that's what they're going to see, that you're sending responding to their inquiry via your iPhone. And I'm pretty sure, whoever we are communicating with doesn't necessarily care, what device we use for communication purposes, but would rather know what we are or what we do, and to also know primarily that we're accessible to them. So we don't want that. Essentially, what we want on both our iOS devices, our Mac computers, is to make sure that our signature is very consistent with our signature in our @royallepage.ca email in Gmail, in the webmail. So whether we are in the webmail, or on our iOS device or iPhones, or on the Mac computer, we want to make sure that we have one consistent email that carries over without necessarily giving us that additional work, right? So without giving us the additional, oh, I need to type in my email here, oh, I need to do that. No, we just need to have everything set up so that we just respond to the email. And when the recipient receives the email and knows, this is a professional email that I'm receiving from a very professional individual. So now we're going to move to the very first practical component of the webinar, and this is essentially how to set up your @royallepage.ca email to your iOS device. Don't worry about the video on the screen moving too fast. I'm going to go back and go through the process with you again. And yeah, so just to make sure, again here, just to make sure that we're all really connected. We're all connected to the Wi-Fi, or we have our data turned on. Make sure that we have our iCloud turned on. And then we can go ahead and start this part of the webinar. So again, what we want to do here is to make sure that we have our @royallepage.ca email set up to our iOS device. So we need to go into our settings. So all of my apps are all kind of organized into folders. It just makes it easier for me to be able to know what's where, rather than just having a whole bunch of apps in my face. So we go into our settings, and then click on add an account. You add an account. So let's repeat that. I'm going to try and go super slow here just so that we're all on the same page. So we go on settings. Click on settings. And then here where it says add account, we're going to click there. And then here, these are all the different types of, web mails that we can actually host on our mail client. So we can add those accounts to our Mac Mail or our Mac iOS and ensure that whether we're online or offline, we can retrieve emails, and we can always have access to those information right at our fingertips. So in our case, what we want to make sure we select is Google, because that's what we're using, right? So we select Google. And then it's going to bring us to this page where we need to enter our email. So I'm entering my email, teambachu@royallepage.ca. So this is going to, once you enter your email correctly, it's going to bring you then to the second part of that, which is to enter your password. And let's start about that. Let's see what's going on here. Yep, so we're going back again. If you haven't already opened this page, again, it's on settings, going through the steps again. Go to Google, click on that. We'll add our email or phone number, depending on how you have your account set up. But I think in most of our cases, it's definitely going to be our email. So make sure here we're adding our at royallepage.ca email. So we'll add that in. Make sure we're adding that in. And then once you've added that in, it's going to, so you've entered your password, right? So I didn't, show you me entering my password because that's my password. So it brings you, if you have the two-step verification set up, it's going to bring you to this page where essentially it's going to ask you for the verification code, right? So make sure that you're able to access that verification code depending on how you set it up. If you don't see this notification, then you don't have the two-step verification set up. And you should definitely do that because it's good for just security purposes. So just making sure that you're the individual accessing your email and just making sure your content is, secure. So again, you go on Google, enter your email address. Very simple, very intuitive process. Enter your password. It's going to require a two-step verification code that you will receive either via email or via text. And then once you enter that code, then you're all set up. And that's it. And again, remember what I mentioned earlier when we started the webinar, and I said, sorry about that. I said, make sure that your iCloud is turned on because we've already added our account here, right? If your iCloud is turned on, means essentially the next time that you open your Mac mail, you're going to have access to your @royallepage.ca on your Mac mail because it's already synced in across the device using iCloud. Are we all good, or is there something that maybe I should go over before we move on? Do you guys have any questions? Am I going too fast? So are we okay? So let's move. So I see a question here from Sharma saying, I always face problems syncing Gmail and iOS native mail app doesn't push. I have to manually refresh. That's a very interesting one. Because I think I don't think I've personally had that issue because I always just once my Gmail is synced into, I have various Gmail accounts that are synced into my Mac mail, and they always are there. So the only reason that you might have to refresh, for example, is to say that maybe if you have changed your password or something, and you might have to like reset that password. But then one thing that I would advise is to make sure that your Apple ID. So make sure that your Apple ID is on, right? So if you go on your setting as well, like on your iOS, you go on your setting, there is that My Account. So make sure that you have your name in there, your Apple ID account and your password, and you're always logged in. So make sure that you're always logged in on your device, your Apple ID device. Then that means that your email is always going to sync in. You don't have to then manually have to refresh it or sign in yourself. So for my own emails that are synced in, so I have my @royallepage.ca email on my device and on my iOS device and on my Mac computer, and I make sure that my Apple ID is always logged in. So I'm always logged on my devices, so I'm not signed out. So that means that I always get my emails as they come in, and I don't have to actually manually refresh my my connection. So I hope that answers the question. If you guys have any other questions, don't hesitate to write them down here in the chat function. And if I'm going too slow, I know sometimes maybe your internet connection might be slow, or you might need me to repeat a step. or you might be missing a step, and then I might need to go back. Okay, let's see here. Sharma, all checked. Only difference is that I don't have a Mac. I've been facing it for about a year. Just to clarify, Sharma, are you just on an iOS device? Because it should, yeah, I think if your Mac, if your accounts are all turned on, logged on, then I'm not really sure why you would manually have to log back in. That's something that I might have to look into, but that's not an issue that I faced. But I might definitely have to look into that. And it shouldn't really matter if you have Mac Mail or not, right? Because each device it's a standalone device. The only reason that it would carry over again is that you have your Mac Mail, and if you have your iOS and you have your Mac computer, then by turning on that iCloud function, it carries over. But if you just have your iPhone, then that's still fine. So you don't necessarily need a Mac for that to, or for there to be an issue or to not be an issue with the syncing of the email. But we just need to verify and make sure that your connection is all good to go for that. But it should, yeah, it should. If you, yeah, I think I'm gonna look into that. That's a really good point. It's not an issue that I face, but I will definitely look into that. So now, moving on to the other bit, moving on to the other bit of the webinar, which is really important, and I already mentioned it. I just see an email, a question here from Lindy. How do I get a notification when a new email comes into my RLP email? So if your RLP, like say that your email is, your first name, your last name at royallepage.ca, and that email is added on, as we've already gone through the steps. Hopefully some of you went through those steps with me, and you were able to add your accounts. Once you've gone through all of those steps, as you're receiving your RLP email in your Gmail webmail, you're also receiving that email in your Mac mail or in your iOS device. So you're getting it live as well in your iOS device. So if I was to send myself, for example, an email from, say, my personal email into my at royallepage.ca via the webmail, I will also receive a notification on my Mac mail that I have an incoming email. Right. So it's a normal process as you receive email notifications on your Mac device or your iPhone device. So it's just going to come through that mail function. And Lindy asked another interesting question. How do I create folders to categorize apps? That's a really interesting thing. And I find it's really useful for me just because sometimes you don't want to just have too many different apps on your phone screen. It's not really the point of this webinar, but I'll just touch on it really quickly before we move on. So what you do is you press on one app. So if you have like maybe your different banking apps, so if you have BMO, you have whatever, press on it, press and hold, and then there's going to be the X function, X bar that comes on the top as if you're about to delete that app. Then move the app onto another one. It automatically creates that folder. So that folder, like if you repeat that steps and you're grouping those different apps together, then you're able then to create that folder automatically, and you can rename them. So by again pressing on it on that app, it opens up the folder and you can rename the folder and categorize those folders on the different apps that you have. So now again, moving on to the next bit of the webinar, which is essentially how to again add your signature onto your iOS device. Again, as I mentioned, this is a really important part of our communication process because we want to stay consistent. We don't want to tell, potential buyers that we're using this device while communicating with them. So my video here is going quite fast. So what I want to show you is, let's start again. Click again on settings. Everything that you have to do in terms of adding your email, in terms of, adding signature or different changes that you have to do in your settings within your iOS device, that always starts here. this setting for the setting. I don't know if I should call it tab or button or, but our settings. So you always click on that. And then once you open up the setting, you go on mail. So settings, and then it opens up your settings for your mail. Click on signature. So as you can see here, let's go back. So if you click on signature, you can see that you can set your signature for multiple accounts. So let's say if you have 2 accounts, 3 accounts, 4 accounts, you can set your signatures for those different accounts, right? And the one thing also that I should just maybe mention as a side note here is that if you have added previous accounts to your Mac Mail, to your iOS device, you want to be always updating those. So for example, if you're not using that account anymore or actively using it, make sure you remove it from your iOS device because you don't want to be getting a notification that you're not acting on, right? So you do want to make sure that you're only adding devices or accounts that you are actively using, just so that you're responding and following up on important inquiries. So again, let's repeat this step. We click on settings, and then it brings us to our mail setting. We go on to signature. Again, we have different, we can set different signatures for different accounts. What I did here essentially was that I opened my email. So I opened my Yahoo, my at royallepage.ca email on my phone, just copied my signature, right? I selected my entire signature, copied it, and then just brought that over into my Mac, onto my iOS device. Sorry about that. Brought that over to my iOS device and just pasted that here. So I just pasted that. The formatting is consistent, right? The link still is shared. So because when I was copying everything, make sure that you're copying also with the links. And then that's it. So I'm already set up. My email function is already set up. The one thing that I would like to highlight here also is that when you're setting up that email, make sure that you actually delete, like remove this sent from my iPhone, because I have seen emails where the agent definitely has their professional email there, but on top of that email, it still says sent from my iPhone. So you want to make sure that you actually delete that messaging there, and then copy and paste your actual signature. So it's very simple. Copy from your email, so you can copy from your web email, and then transfer that over by just pasting it into the signature setting on your iOS device. And I see a question here from Joanne. Can you add a photo or other image logo to the signature? You can definitely add a logo. Depending on the size of it, it might not be it might not necessarily be a good fit, just in terms of how it presents itself in the viewing. I would not necessarily suggest adding a logo in this scenario because it is a mobile device. What I would suggest is, and there is no, for example, if there was a function to say you just upload a photo or upload a logo, then you can say that you can modify how that logo is viewed, right? Like how it displays on the actual signature. But here there is no tab or button to actually insert a photo. So if you're actually wanting to insert a logo here or a photo of yourself, then you have to copy it and paste it, and then that might just be tricky. So for your mobile device, I would just advise just having the blank signature as I do on mine. So just my name, just where I work, contact information, and that's about it. But still very consistent, still across, if you have your logo on your web email, it's still not an issue to not have that in the iOS device, as long as you still have the rest of the signature on there. But in terms of adding your logo, adding your image, that might be a little bit tricky. There is no function to actually add that in. If you copy and paste it, then it might just mess up the actual layout of the signature itself. Hi, Doc. I just saw your message here on say, just wondering if we're looking on how to set up calendars in this webinar. So our Google Calendar, which is also hooked up to Smart Studio, will properly linked with our Mac calendar. So we're not necessarily looking at how to set up the calendars. What we're looking at is how to transfer events or appointments from your email into your calendar. So we're not going into the full functionality of setting up the calendar. That's something that we can do separately on a different webinar. But what I want to do in this one in terms of calendars, essentially to say if you have an inquiry for an appointment on this day, this time, you don't necessarily have to manually then open your calendar and add that information in. There is a way to just transfer that date and time, if it's hyperlinked in the email, transfer that into the calendar so you don't have to put too much work into that process. Are we all set with setting up our signatures for iOS? I like that questions are coming in. It means that this is a really interesting topic for our agents. And if it's an issue that you've been facing, I'm always here. Our learning services team is always here to provide further support in terms of how to make your communication process easier, how to get get access to different types of tools and resources to help you, because essentially that's why we're here. We're here to provide assistance to you in terms of running your business. So if you have any other question as we move forward, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat function again. So we have just set up our signature on our iOS device. So because I already added let's pause this here and then just see, because I already added my email account into my iOS device, you can see here now that my email it automatically carries over into my Mac mail, again, because I have my iCloud turned on across both devices. And again, going back to the point of having my Apple ID always turned on, it's always on. I'm always logged in, just to ensure that if an email is coming in, I get that notification ASAP. Once I see that I'm not logged in, I go back and I log in. And generally I don't have to log back into my Apple ID unless, say, for example, I haven't logged in for a long time on my device, which is really, really rare because I'm always on my computer, I'm always on my phone. Or, so for example, I changed my password and then it's not I then now log into my computer and I log into my email and it's not updating, right? So then I have to go back into my Apple ID and then change that password into my Apple ID password. And that's about it, which rarely ever happens. So as we can see from here, my at royallepage.ca email is already added onto my computer because I've added that on my phone. It's the same process that you experience if you have both a Mac computer and an iPhone. You can only, let's say it would be easier, just set up your email on your iOS device, and then you don't have to worry about that email being set up on your Mac computer. But what I want to show you here, because it's slightly different, is again how to make sure that your signature is set up for your Mac computer, because you still also have to do that, right? Like the signature again carries over. But I still want to point this out because it's a very important part of our communication process and just being consistent and just making sure that we're putting our best foot forward. So let's try this video from the very beginning. So this is my mail open. As you can see, I have a lot of junk mail. So what we want to do here, and this is a slight difference. Let's go back. We have our mail open. You select, whatever email, click on the system preference, like the system preference that's up at the very top of your Windows. And then once you click on that, this little tab opens. You just click on, let's repeat that. So I'll show you the process. Click on mail, click on preference, and the preference automatically brings down this window. So here you're able to set up different preferences for the different parts of your email. So for example, here we want to set up our signature, right? So if we want to set up our signature, let's go back. What I did here was essentially that, and you don't have to do this. What you can also just do again, and it's probably easier if you're having a hard time doing this, is that just have your Gmail account open and then have your Mac mail open. so that again you just copy and paste the signature. But what I did here was that I just copied and pasted my signature on my notes. So I have it on my notes, and it's again because my note is turned on iCloud, I have access to my signature on my notes on both my iCloud and my iOS device. So again, you don't have to do this. You can literally just direct copy and paste, and that's about it. Like you just, it's that simple once we get through it. So let's try this process again and just see the step. I just really, really want to make sure that we're able to follow the steps because my videos are going quite fast, but I want to make sure that we all get it. Okay. Again, here on our Mac device, you can set up again the different signatures for the different accounts. It gives you that option. And this is one thing again that I really like about using the Mail client on Mac and on our iOS device, just because I can have this set up on my iOS device and then it carries over into my Mac, right? But like, just that ability to be able to set different signatures for your different emails. So you can have your @royallepage.ca email have that separate signature. And if you're writing an email to someone, that email automatically fits in. Right? That signature fits into the email. So you don't have to, go then select the signature. No. As you select that email, because there's a signature associated to that email, once you select that email, then that signature fits in. So I select my @royallepage.ca email, go into my notes, just copy my entire signature. And then put that in. And then I come back, copy the link because I do want to make sure that the link is still a hyperlink. Copy link, put that in. So again, you just enter the link and you hyperlink it just because you want that consistency across your email. So if someone's clicking on your website, they're actually directly going into that website. So, and that's it. Like, as similar to the iOS device, that's just us setting our email. So then I've gone back again to my signature, and you see that the signature is already set up. The different links, if you want to link your Facebook, if you want to link your Twitter, LinkedIn, or whichever social media accounts that you are using, you can definitely link those in, but you have to actually link each individual link, right? Otherwise, it's just going to fit in as a text. So you have to always go back, highlight the link, make sure that you're linking it as you're making sure that it's entered as a hyperlink. And then again, you can come here and you can name each signature and, making sure that you're all set and proper to go. So that's my signature set up on my device. And I wanted to show you this just because some of you might have an iOS device, but you might not have a Mac computer, or you might have a Mac computer and you might not have an iOS device. But it's really important to set up that signature, and that was the main, the primary thing in terms of there being any difference in terms of how to set that up. But in terms of the actual email, the process is consistent across both devices, so it's all good. Again, do we have any questions? Now we're moving on to how to save an event into our calendar, right? So again, I'm not showing you guys how to maybe link both, link your @royallepage.ca calendar to your Mac, your iPhone calendar. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing essentially is just saving events. So if you if you have an open day and you have or different appointments and bookings or whatever on your email, right? Say if you have 5 of those, rather than actively opening your calendar manually again, entering all of those details. If you receive an email like this, there is a day, a month. Sometimes it's just a day and the time, and it's still it's hyperlinked. Your device on your iOS device or your Mac computer, that day and time, or month, or however the actual day is set up, or presented to you. I feel like I couldn't speak there for a few minutes. However, that date's presented to you in that email. As long as it's hyperlinked, so as long as you see this little like line underneath, again with the address, it means that you can directly carry that event over into your calendar. So let's just go over this again. So what I did was I just opened again a random email that has a date. It's a call to action to attend an event or call to action to have a meeting or something. So then click on the date, click on create event, and what you see here is that the location of that event already carries over, the date already carries over, the time already carries over, right? So you don't have to enter those informations. And sometimes even depending again on how that date or appointment is presented in the email, the title of the event can also carry over sometimes. So here what we want to do if the title isn't carried over is just to, put a title in there. You can say, if it's a viewing, you can save that as a viewing. If it's, whatever else that may be, then it carries over and saves into your calendar. The other thing that I really should mention then here is that depending again on the event, whether it's a recurring event, you can for example have your alerts. So if you want, to be alerted, every day of this week or whatever. So for, say if it's, yeah, you can have that alert there. If it's a repeating event, if it repeats, you can ask here if it repeats like every day, like every, certain day of the week. If it repeats like on every Tuesday, then you can set that to repeating every Tuesday. So you always get that alert every Tuesday rather than having to manually like re-enter those events every single Tuesday, right? So for every single Tuesday. So you can just set those events if it's again. And then one thing here, if it's that location with the location being saved on the event, you can, estimate the travel time just so that you're prepared. So those are different settings that you can go into the calendar and play with and look at, depending on say if you have an event coming up and just, wanting to know how to actually go there and set those different customized notifications, you can definitely do that. And then the one thing here also that I really like, it's the notes part. So once you carry that event over from your email into the actual calendar, the notes sometimes also carry over again, depending on the email and how all of that is structured. So the notes will carry over. If they don't, and this is a very specific meeting to you, and it's a very specific context, and there's something, something to remember about that meeting or before going into that meeting, just have your notes in there just so that you have, that full information. So again, that's adding our, transferring events from our Google Calendar, from our email essentially to our iOS calendar on both our Mac and iOS device. Is there any questions about adding our events, carrying our events over that I should maybe look into? I see a question here from Lindsay, and I'm not sure that I've gone over this question. I only have it set up through Gmail and not through iCloud, so that's why. It's really important that you have your iCloud turned on, because if you don't have it turned on, then your email will not sync across those devices, right? So essentially but iCloud itself isn't necessarily important for your emails coming in. The iCloud should not affect your email coming in. So if you have your email added to your Mac mail, it's going to still come in as long as you're connected properly. The main point of the iCloud is to say if you have multiple devices, then you don't have to set up those different functions on those two devices. You can just set them up on one device, and then it carries over, syncs through iCloud to the next. So again, we always want to make sure that with whatever we're doing, that our devices are up to date, and that we're able to have access to all of those resources in terms of making sure that whether we're adding our emails, we're able to follow the different steps to add those email accounts to our mail, whether it's looking at calendar, whether it's looking at iCloud, right? iCloud essentially is just a way to share information across those devices, but it doesn't affect you being able to set up your Gmail on your iOS or on your actual device itself. So moving on, let's see here. So what we have essentially done is that we looked at the differences between an iOS and Mac Mail. Well, understand the differences. So that should be, yeah. So understand the differences between um, a webmail essentially and a mail client. And then understanding, we also understood the different functionalities in iOS to help ease communication. So those different functionalities again should be, the different filters that we have access to in within the iOS device. And again, I need to say this: some of those filters are in Gmail as well, in the webmail function, in the webmail of Gmail. So but the main thing that I do want to highlight with the iOS device is that again, all of those information and the process itself of actually accessing those information is very simple and it's very consistent across those devices. And if you can have your Gmail within that mail client, then why not, right? So why have a separate app for a Gmail and then have a separate email when you can just have all of those email feed within one mail client, but then still have those individualized inbox. That just makes the process so much easier for you and gives you gives you a lot more time to be able to engage in your business in other areas of your business because you're a lot more efficient now in terms of the communication process. And essentially, and this is the main thing for me, is that essentially you all now know how to add your at royallepage.ca email to your Mac Mail or your iOS. If that's still an issue, this webinar definitely will be available live because it after it's ended because it is recorded. So it will be available, it will be shared, and you'll be able to go back to the video and follow the step-by-step process in terms of adding your at royallepage.ca email to your iOS device or your mail client. Also, we should have by the end of this webinar, or what, this is one of the things that we've done. So we should, by the end of this webinar, know how to then add our signature to both mail and iOS clients. So again, if we are unable to, or we haven't done so, because my hope is that as I was going through those process, that you were following with me and you're able to actually try and add your email to your iOS device. But if that wasn't the case, again, you can definitely access this video at a later time and you'll be able to follow the process and make sure that your communication process is a whole lot simpler. Again, I would like to mention that in as much as our bilingual customer care team is here to provide support, we do not support Mac Mail or in general, Mac products because beyond providing, beyond providing the actual server parameters in terms of adding the Gmail for our iOS device. So for the phone, the iOS phone, that's about it, right? But in terms of the actual Mac computer, we actually can't provide any support for that just because there are so many different systems with Mac computer that we're unable to cater for. But if you definitely, feel free to reach out to our customer care team if you have any other issues relating to adding your iOS, adding your Gmail into your Mac, into your mail client on your iOS device. In terms of that, we can support in providing the server information, and that's about it. I do have additional resources here that you can make use of in terms of just, again, going through the step-by-step process of adding email accounts to your iPhone, whether your iPad, iPod Touch, all of your different your Apple products that you always use on the go. So you might not always have your computer with you to respond to those emails. But if you have your iPhone device, if you have your iPad, you can still be productive on those devices and still be professional across all of those devices. So I've added this. It is a hyperlink, but I could also maybe send all of you guys the all of those who register on this webinar, send you the actual link itself, because I don't think you'd be able to just copy it from there. But on the website, on the Apple website, there are resources in terms of adding those emails and also looking at different functions of within Apple products. So whether it's adding contacts into your iCloud, working across calendar. So I like syncing your Google Calendar to your calendar on your Mac device or your iOS device, because that's also a really useful tool, being able to just sync your calendars to that one device. And then also, looking at reminders, because, setting reminders for ourselves for different meetings, for different activities that we have to carry throughout the day. It's really important. But those are just additional resources that we can find on apple.ca. And again, this is just for, in terms of providing you all of the resources that you can have to be better able to communicate with potential buyers, potential sellers, just to make sure that you're on top of communication, that you're not daunted by that entire process of having to log into separate email accounts. Know that there's the option to have all of your different inboxes within that one mail client, and you can just very easily communicate and grow your business from there. Before we end the webinar, I'd like to ask you if we have any other additional question. I'm happy to see that the webinar has been very useful to some of you. Hopefully it's useful to all of you. And again, don't even, after the webinar, if you have any questions, you can always for sure reach me at learningservices@royallepage.ca, and I'll be able to provide further assistance from there. So thank you so much for tuning in again. And hopefully it's been a very helpful webinar. And yeah, don't I was very excited doing this, just because I feel communication is a really important process in terms of just operations for our businesses. So making sure that we have all of those, or we can make use of all of those additional resources that we might not know, might not be aware of. So thank you for joining, and have a good rest of your day.